The gender wars have escalated. Hi, I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. And today's podcast is running a bit behind because I wanted to sort of deeply think about this 10 minutes before I recorded it. Because, as you know, this stuff is, as the kids would say, it's that deep. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, it is that deep. Now, first and foremost, as I always do, I want to say thank you to the 15 people who subscribe to my podcast. It's probably at least 7 or 8 more people than I thought would ever subscribe to the podcast. Wonderful to have you all listening to me. And I don't know if you're debating when I ramble on, but you're at least listening to me ramble on. And much like Led Zeppelin, I appreciate that. It's a reference to a Led Zeppelin song. And as I learned today, they're no longer classic rock, they're oldies. That makes me sad and hurts my heart. But anyways, I opened this by saying the gender wars have escalated. And why is that? I will submit to the jury, as I always do, that the gender wars have escalated thanks to a little movement called the Red Pill movement. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with what the Red Pill movement is, it is the advocacy of men's rights exclusively. Now, the group themselves, I will give people who are advocates of this group credit, right? I don't think most of the people in this group, most of the people who would follow Red Pill, I think a lot of the people who are just in that group are just simply hurt. They are hurt, they're down bad, and they start to hear a group that really is saying some things that they think are true. What things are being said? That would be the important next question. So things like, if you ever see on YouTube a guy holding a microphone and interviewing girls and asking sort of leading questions. For example, questions like, what do you bring to the table? Just sort of saying to a young woman, what do you bring to the table? Setting them up such that their answers can only be ridiculous. Or if you've watched the Fresh and Fit podcast, the extreme version of this would be Andrew Tate. Now, I'm going to say this too, and I don't want people to get confused about this. Every movement has some truth in it. Now, the Red Pill movement started to pick up steam because there just was there's a large movement of disaffected young men in the United States today because it's a confusing time to be a young man in the world. Why is it a confusing time to be a young man? Well, because frankly, people are telling you can't be a man. They're just telling you can't, right? Like, they're either telling you can't be a man or you need to be a monster. Like, those are the two messages people are getting. There's articles being written about how physical fitness is a right-wing conspiracy. And there's movements to suggest that men aren't allowed to have choices. A lot of men have been burned by no-fault divorce. And before somebody dives in on me with this, like, look, no-fault divorce needed to be invented. I'm going to say invented, but no-fault divorce needed to be invented because there was a massive problem in the legal system of essentially trapping people together for even in abusive relationships, right? You married somebody, they started beating the crap out of you. You had to go to great lengths to prove they were beating the crap out of you, which, okay, we're going to all agree that that's not good. So no-fault divorce was invented to sort of counter that. The problem being now, it also becomes, anything that's invented can be taken advantage of. So a lot of men have been hurt by no-fault divorce. A lot of men have been hurt by women. And whereas when women are hurt by men, there's sort of, I think, an outpouring of support. And I know what some people are going to say. They're going to say, no, that never happens. We're talking low stakes hurt, right? Like, let's get that clear. Let's talk low stakes hurt here for the moment. Getting broken up, getting cheated on. A lot of it just seems to go against men. Does that mean that men don't have numerical advantages in other categories? No, it doesn't mean that. It just means that men, in especially the dating world, are down bad right now. So what is the red pill community? The red pill community is essentially a place where powerful voices have fed off of that hurt. And what did I say in another podcast? Where does what we would perceive as evil actions come from? It comes from a place of fear and hurt. So the red pill community is a community of very hurt men who need to find a way to band together. And what they come to is these sort of wacky conclusions. And then they decide that they're going to set these people, they're going to come to a lot of basically self-fulfilling prophecies. For example, the Whatever podcast. I listen to it sometimes, mostly because I sometimes just can't believe what people will willingly actually say on a camera. But they invite on, it's usually, I think that Brian is the host, Brian somebody. They invite this guy, Brian. Brian comes on. He invites this panel of usually young women, a significant number of whom each episode are usually OnlyFans models. I know where he finds them. He goes on OnlyFans. I don't know how he gets them on camera, but typically speaking, he asks the same sort of series of questions. What would you rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 10? Do you think it's good to do OnlyFans? Talks about things like body count, and body count is just, how many times, how many people you've had sex with. That's what body count is. And it's not, he sets it up such that there is no good way for these young women to answer. And most of the time, the young women steer into it. I've got to say that. Like these young women in these interviews on the Red Pill community, they've probably been selectively edited. They've probably been selectively picked. Any way you go about it, though, these young women are steering right into the trap and steering right off the cliff. So these podcasts, the Fresh and Fit would be another example of one. They're set up to view women in the most negative possible light. Now they're set up, I think, out of a misguided idea of believing they need to find a truth, and then they sort of, they create their own kind of self-fulfilling prophecy with that. Like the Fresh and Fit podcast, for example, the host, I forget his name, probably should have written it down, but you listen to it and you'll hear a good point. You'll hear like, okay, yeah, like we have to have some objectivity about ourselves. Like we can't possibly sit here and think to ourselves that, women can't think to themselves like they're only going to date a man who makes more than $100,000 a year. That's that's an insane standard to try and hold somebody to. But most that's not a normal. That's a view outside of the norm. That's the problem with the red pill community. It's not that this internet-wide group of people got together and said, hey, let's share something about a common interest. The problem is the common interest is purposefully reinforcing their own fear. And that's what the red pill community is. It's a bunch of guys who are afraid of women. I hate to say it, right? And like I said, there's kernels of truth in every movement. There is a lot of pushback against masculinity in the modern era. And there's a lot of pushback against masculinity in the modern era because there has been a failure to communicate what masculinity actually is. It is not domineering, right? It's not controlling. Is it physical fitness? Yeah. Is it having a sort of provider mentality? Yes. There are some things about men that have just been true for a long, long time. And of course, now I've pissed off both the right and the left because I just dragged the red pill community for 9 minutes. And now I just said that there are things about men that make them men. And I'm going to get dragged by the left for that. But that's okay. I have fun with it. I wouldn't be doing it right if I didn't make enemies everywhere. There is a very good reason why all of these ancient texts and ancient religions spent a lot of time trying to define gender roles. Because where we are right now is there's a lack of definition. And anytime there's a lack of definition, you're just struggling to find your place in the world. The problem is the older you get and the longer you spend trying to find your place in the world, your place in the world just ends up being nothing. And you end up sort of screaming into a void. And look, there are people who are cheered on by the red pill community who aren't crazy and aren't insane. Like, I don't think Jordan Peterson is insane. I think beyond being a trained clinical psychologist, I think he's got, he speaks pretty truthfully on matters. And he never speaks really negatively about things. He speaks negatively about not allowing someone to be who they are, right? Look, men, be men, but find a man to learn from. Don't learn from the internet. Women, be women. Find a woman to learn from, though. Don't learn from the internet. Especially don't learn from OnlyFans, my lord. Transgender people. I don't know how you would learn how to be transgender, because I don't know who in that community you go to seek wisdom, but go and seek wisdom in that community. Look, you don't learn football from a baseball coach. So if you're seeking how to be a man, go find a man. Talk to a man in real life. Or at least one-on-one. But don't use selective clips from podcasts and Instagram and Twitter to try and learn it. If you try and learn how to be a man from the red pill community, all you're going to learn is that you need to be terrified of every single woman on the planet, and that's not true. Learn how to be a man from a man. This was a rambling 10 minutes, and now we're at 12 minutes, so I'm going to let you all go now. Thank you for subscribing. If you liked what you heard, like and subscribe. If you didn't like it, well, thanks for listening anyway. I'm Nick. This is 10 Minutes with Nick. Have a great night.